listen, Phil, thank you for joining us. We're really looking forward to chatting to you over the next half an hour or so about life as a, I think there's a percussion workshop or something going on.
Sorry, we started, sorry.
I didn't know that. So
Off you go.
That's right. We're gonna chat about life as a session musician, if that's all right. We were just saying that the first time I kind of came across you was back in, I don't know how many years ago, but it was the 50th anniversary of the Fender Stratocaster concert.
So that's 2004, wasn't it?
Wow, yeah, it probably was. And I remember kind of being encapsulated by your tone as a guitarist and kind of fascinated by it. What I want to talk today, though, is more about your career as a session musician, because
sure,
it's kind of what your bread and butter has been. Well, certainly in the most recent past.
Well, certainly since 1973, really.
Fantastic. So give us, I guess, before we kind of talk about the day-to-day life of a session musician and the pros and the cons of it, the ups and the downs, give us a little bit about your history, where it all started, how you got into it, and kind of talk us through your career right from the beginning.
Okay, 5 years old, picked up a ukulele and never looked back.
Yeah.
No, I was surrounded by other musicians. I had two uncles, still have two uncles in a band called the Kinks. So back in the 60s, the early 60s, I was fascinated by them and the success they were having, so I got addicted to the whole rock and roll thing when I was about 10, and so school was pretty much out the window already. I had no intentions of studying. I just wanted to be a musician. I knew exactly where I was going, and by 15. I was in a band and I was playing regularly. I left school at 17 with not much in terms of qualifications, etc. Although my dad nagged me to get a proper job, so I did a proper job for a few years. But I was around 1969, 70, I guess it was. Uncle Ray Davis opened up a studio called Conch in Hornsey, and I used to hang out there as a kid and see what went on, and sit at the back of the studio and just watch professionals create music.
Sure.
And I became fascinated with the whole idea. And by chance, they were recording a girl called Claire Hamill at the time. They were recording an album with her. And there was Clem Catini on drums and Phil Chen on bass, and it was fascinating. I was, the chemistry was just electric. I was really interested in that, just watching it. And while they were out at dinner one night, I snuck in the studio. I was playing. Ray had a beautiful old sunburst Telecaster with a white binding, you know that one?
Yeah, I do. Yeah, on the edge, yeah.
And I was sitting in the studio tinkering away on that through an amp, and they all came back from dinner and they were sitting in the control room, and I didn't know they were there, and I'm tootling away, and Claire came in. She said, "That sounds really good. Do you want to play on my record?"
Wow.
And that was the start. That was my first ever session, and we ended up doing like 4 or 5 tracks on that record, and the whole session thing kind of exploded from there, really. Evolved from there, let's say evolved from there. Slow at first, but, the more connections you make, the more connections you make.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's how it worked back then. And within a year or so, I was doing 3-4 sessions a day. Back those days, you could do 4 sessions a day at different studios for different people.
Yeah.
That's how it worked. You were booked for 3 hours, and you were expected to contribute something to the situation. And then you could go away, jump in your car, throw the guitars in, and go to the next one. And it would be a completely different place, a completely different genre of music, a different bunch of people, obviously. And that's how it worked back then. And so a day could involve a jingle in the morning, for example. The jingles were historically done early because they would get cheap studio time.
Yeah, of course.
And then do like a 10 till 1, and then a 3 till 5, and then a 7 till 10, whatever it was. And that's how it worked. Eventually, I remember sitting down with a guy. I was doing a Sheena Easton session.
Yeah.
For Chris Neal at Audio International in Baker Street. I doubt if it's still there. And I was chatting to Sheena's manager guy, an old break your legs kind of old style manager.
Old school. They're still out there.
I'm sure they are. And I was chatting to him. He said, "How you doing, PP?" I said, "I'm doing good. I'm working a lot." I said, "I'm a bit tired." He said, "You know what you should do, son? You should double your fees." I said, "What?" And but it did something amazing, and it was a great piece of advice because it eliminated basically a lot of the sessions that anybody could do.
Yeah, absolutely.
And made me a little bit exclusive. And so after I was working half as much and earning the same.
Yeah.
Initially, but strangely after a couple of months, I was working flat out again and earning twice as much. So, as an idea, it worked very well. But the most important thing was it made me exclusive.
Yeah.
And people were booking me for what I contributed rather than the other way around.
As a generic guitarist. I guess a question then: How do session musicians that want to craft a living at this, how do they make themselves unique? I've obviously kind of known you're playing for a long, long time, and you do have quite a unique style that you've got, and your tone is, for me, certainly instantly recognisable, and clearly for the people that book you it is. How do people go about developing their own unique sound that allows them to command that additional fee and to craft this into a full-time career?
It's a difficult one because initially you use other guitar players as a template. You walk into a session and you'll say, "Okay, what are we doing?" They'll play you the piece of music, and then they'll say something like, "We want it in the style of Ricky, whoever." And that's a starting point, and then you adapt from there, and you create something of your own from that first idea. But the only way I think to develop your own style is obviously we're all influenced by other guitar players.
Yeah, naturally.
I tried not to be influenced by one in particular.
Okay.
I think back in the 60s, everybody was influenced by Chet Atkins.
Yeah, sure.
Including Mark Knopfler. People like that. I mean, me and Mark were brought up on the same stuff.
Yeah.
So we're both pickers. We both use our fingers. But I think I consciously, even back then, didn't try to copy anybody.
Yeah.
I wanted to just play the instrument as well as I could. I think working with other musicians is a vital part of developing your style. You can sit at home and practice scales, forever, and it's not the same thing as actually getting out there and working with another person or other people.
Yeah.
And that's the thing that's getting really difficult to do.
Yeah.
Back in the 70s, again, we had the ability. There was a pub circuit. You could go and play gigs, for not much money, but gave you the experience of playing in front of people. That's harder these days, I think, to achieve. I think a lot of the schools, a lot of the colleges, certainly over here in Italy, they're very active. They're very good, and I do quite a few clinics over here, and try to pass on the same information that I'm giving now to the kids over here. But for me, that's the vital part of it, is to listen to other players. And one of the things I say to the kids is, don't play all the time. Listen to other people. Let the music breathe.
Yeah.
It's you can sit in your bedroom and practice fabulous scales and tapping and all that, but honestly, that's useless. Sure. When you get into a situation where you want to expand your horizons musically, you've got to listen to what's going on around you.
Yeah.
And that really is the key for me.
Okay, we touched on kind of your background as a studio session musician, but of course your live credentials are beyond remarkable. So tell us a little bit of how you began in terms of kind of your career, how that transitioned from those early studio days on Baker Street and in those kind of London studios to becoming probably one of the most accomplished live guitarists, certainly in my living memory. Talk us through how that happened and give us a little bit of an insight into some of the shows that you played and the journey that you've been on in that respect.
Okay. I've got Trevor Hall on the phone. I'm going to have to call him back. 1 second. Trev, I'm just doing an interview, love. Can I call you back in about 20 minutes? Thanks, Trev.
Fantastic.
So yeah, we're talking about doing some stuff soon. So
No, it's great.
it still works, the whole session thing. I still get calls like from Trevor. I work a lot with Trevor these days. We have fun. This is not fitting back in my ear properly. I hope you can edit this out. Sorry.
Yeah, no, it's good.
Where was I? Yes. The transition from doing sessions to live work, I suppose it's a natural progression. Obviously, I was doing gigs with little unknown bands before I started doing sessions and stuff. So it wasn't new to live work, but the session thing certainly generated some live stuff, because you do an album with someone, or back then you did an album with someone and they say, can you come and do some gigs with me?
Yeah.
And I enjoyed the balance. I think it's important to have a balance. One kind of feeds the other. So I would be trying things out in studios and then putting them into practice in front of people. So the two things together sort of helped each other, really, because it made it spontaneity is the key to me, and not being too prepared. Now, I think I like to these days. I like to arrive at a gig, not know what amp I'm going to play through, and just plug into something and try and make it work.
Okay.
I like that. It gives me, expands the horizons a bit. It gives you somewhere to go. If you show up the same gig, I mean, we did 275 shows with Dire Straits, and you show up at the gig, and you could be anywhere in the world because everything is exactly the same as it was 2 days before, whatever. So, but I like the spontaneity of things these days, and I think you talk to someone like Eric and stuff, he feels the same.
Sure.
But anyway, as things developed through the 80s, I was doing a lot of sessions. I was working with a chap called David Essex in the 70s. I suppose that was my first proper tour, world tour. That went on for a few years, and I started working with Joan Elmer Trading in the early 80s. We did a world tour with her. Through the 80s, I got involved with Tina Turner. I did a Tina Turner tour. And then I did a couple of albums for a very talented Irish singer-songwriter called Paul Grady. And that kind of opened a lot of doors into a new world for me, really, because his management was the Dire Straits management. It Paul Cummins from Dire Straits management, and then we were playing at a club called the Mean Fiddler in Harlesden, which I think is probably still there, with Brady. And I looked up into the audience, and Eric Clapton was standing in front of me, and it was quite an alarming moment, really, for the guitar player.
Yeah, absolutely.
But we got to know each other there. Clapton was there because he was guesting on one of the tracks that Brady was recording. And we got to know each other, and we bumped into each other, literally bumped into each other again in Antigua when I was on holiday. I think it was in '87, something like that. And he said, I'm doing some tracks in the new year, and it's going to be an album called Journeyman. Yeah. He said, can you come up and play on the album? So that was my first thing with Eric. It was a townhouse in Goldhall Road in London, and Phil Collins was on drums, and Pino Palladino was on bass, and Alan Clark was on keyboards. And we did a couple of tracks, including Bad Love. Yeah. Remember that?
Yeah, I do.
That one?
I think it was that song that made me buy my first wah pedal, I think.
So yeah, that's one of the tracks we did, and from there it went mad for about 5 years. I did three years with Eric, I think it was, and then 2 years with Dire Straits consecutively.
Phil, being out on the road with that level of intensity must take its toll on you both physically and mentally, I guess, because it's a high pressure environment. Looking at outside in. How do you deal with that as a musician?
I don't think it's high pressure, and for me it isn't.
Okay.
I work better when I'm relaxed, and so I find ways of just making it all work for me. I mean, I tended never to get into the proper rock and roll end of things. I didn't drink a lot. I didn't do the drugs. I didn't, and I used to keep fit. I used to play tennis a lot on the road. I would locate a local tennis club and go and play tennis for an hour a day or something, whatever it was. And that keeps you kind of fresh, keeps you mentally alert, keeps you physically fit, and kind of ready. It was hard work at times, the Dire Straits tour. It was never hard work with Eric, honestly. It was just, it was such a great band. It was so much fun to get up there every night. I used to look forward to it. I couldn't wait to get up there. The band with Eric was pure spontaneity. We used to not bother with rehearsals. We'd do a sound check. And there's one of the story where during the sound check for the River Plate Stadium in Argentina with Eric, he said during the sound check, he started playing this. And he said, does anybody know Badge? And I said, I know it. And everyone said, we ran it through, and we played it, and he sang it. And because when I was 14, I'll go back a few years. When I was 14, I sat in front of my mum's stereogram with a stylus, listening to that solo from Goodbye Cream, I think it was on, wasn't it? On that album in 1969, that was. And I learned the solo. This one. Remember that one?
Yeah.
And I'd learnt it when I was a kid. And so we ran it through in the rehearsal at the River Plate Stadium. And he said, let's do it tonight. And I said, yeah, can I do the first solo? And he said, yeah, go ahead. And so when we got to that bit in the song, I played that solo, his solo, from the original version. And if you look, there's a video around it, popped up recently, of me looking at Eric and him looking back at me, And that was a very special moment because he was smiling all over his face and I was having the time of my life. It was that good. The band was so good. It was spontaneous, you know, and everybody listened to each other and was able to feed off each other. And consequently, the arrangements of the band, of the songs, were flexible.
Sure.
They kind of had to be anyway, because you never knew where Eric was going to go. If he fancied just launching off into a solo, it would be, and that's what he did. And you never knew how long it was going to be. So everybody was aware that, you know, you followed Eric, and if he run out of ideas, then that would be the end of the solo. And it was pretty much it. And so we used to just try things out live in front of people. It was great fun.
Obviously, so Dire Straits was a huge part of your life as well. Talk us kind of through how that panned out and
I think there was a moment. I mean, Eric had a tragedy in his life when he lost his son, Connor, and we were all in the band at that time. We met up at the funeral. It was a terribly sad day, and a few days after that, Roger Forrester, Eric's manager, gave us all a call and said, "Listen, I don't know what Eric's going to do for the future, but I don't think he's going to be doing anything soon. So if anything comes up, you should all consider, your livelihood. Take it." And just about that time, I started talking to Paul Cummins at the Dire Straits office about potentially doing their tour. And so I accepted that because I had no idea how long Eric was going to be inactive. And they said, "You need to sign a contract because it's 2 years of your life, blah, blah, blah." So I signed the contract. And literally, I think it was about 5 days after I signed the contract, Eric called me up. Wow. And he said, "I want to do an unplugged album. Can you do it with me?" And I said, "No." I said, "I can't do it." And I actually tried to bail out of the Dire Straits tour, but they said, "No, you've got to do it now." And so I went into that for a couple of years, and it was fascinating. For example, to rehearse with Eric, we did 3 days in the hall in The Hague, in Holland somewhere. They booked the arena where we were doing the first date for 3 days prior to, and that was the rehearsal period. So we did 3 days with Eric, and then we did 3 months for Dire Straits rehearsal. That was the difference. Yeah. It was the mentally different approach to performing live. I soon understood why Mark had wanted so much rehearsal. I mean, the difficult thing with a band like Dire Straits is the dynamics and the rallentandos. The structure of the music is pretty intense at times. So to learn Telegraph Road, for example, took about a week. Yeah. Really did, because it's an intense piece of music, but the long 13-minute version of it.
The arrangements are quite remarkable in a lot of the Dire Straits.
Yeah, and it's all led and it's all driven usually from Alan Clark. He was responsible for a lot of those things. And so, but to get 9 people to all feel those dynamics and those rallentandos at the same time is really intense and difficult to do. So that's what took the time. Also, I have an idea that Mark, obviously when Mark plays live, he has to do the important bits of his solos. He has to do them. So, but rather than go crazy every night, play exactly the same thing, he used to find ways of incorporating them into the structure of a solo. So you get all that stuff. You have to do it. he had to do it, you know, so he couldn't not do it because the audience.
Iconic within the
Yeah, it's like doing Shakespeare without the key lines, you know, to be or not to be, you can't do it. And so he found it, I think a lot of the time he was experimenting to try and keep himself free, but incorporate the important soliloquies, you know, the important lines that he had to play. And I think that he used to spend quite a lot of time noodling around, trying to find ways in and out of the important sections.
So in addition to your kind of work as the guitarist in the band, you also take on the musical director role, and I've been at events where that's been the case and seen you in action doing that. What I guess you've already talked about the contrast between the Eric Clapton stuff and the Dire Straits stuff, and how those two completely different approaches. The one being that kind of organic free feel, which when you've got Pino Palladino, that's relatively easy to do when you've got such a high caliber of musician. And then there's the kind of ultra rehearsed end of the scale, which we talked about with the Dire Straits. Where, in terms of when you're the music director and the book starts, where do you sit on that scale? What works for you?
It depends who you've got around you. As you say, if you've got great players around you, I mean, a lot of the things that I've been musical director at, I've chosen Pino. Yeah. You know, because you just know that whatever he does instinctively is going to be the right thing. So you don't need to direct him at all. He just does his thing. You leave him to do it. He never follows a part with anything. And he does it brilliantly. And he plays the right note at the right time and leaves the right space in between them. You know, it's one of the things I bang on about quite a lot is this: music is the space between the notes. Someone said this hundreds of years ago, and I think it's so true. And it's great. A great description of how to play music well is to leave holes in it sometimes, to leave some space in it. Pino does that kind of instinctively. We had Ian Thomas, I think, on drums. It's the same deal, you know. He knows what to do. You don't need to direct these people. So all you need to do is to find the right connection for the artist that you're working with, and find a way to make them happy. So musical direction in those situations is quite easy, because if you've got a great band around you, you don't have to direct them. Yeah. You just have to really make some suggestions to the artist. And you know, the Strat Pack that you mentioned before, that was a great event, because everybody mucked in, and it's important that they do in those events. I mean, some of the other ones I've done, the Party at the Palace, for example, the Queen's Jubilee, was the same deal. And
it was a similar band, wasn't it?
I think it was Pino again, yeah. Phil Collins was on that.
Phil Collins played drums, yeah. Wicks was there as well, and
Wixie, yeah. We do a lot. Wicks is just brilliant, you know. He's so clever. Wicks plays keyboards for McCartney, of course, still. But the thing that we did at the Palace was Michael Kamen and Phil Ramone, I think. Okay. They were the MDs on that. And we rehearsed at the Music Bank down by Tower Bridge there.
Oh, yeah.
And as I arrived at rehearsal the first day, someone had found a big black dustbin, plastic bin, right? And they put it by the door and written "Egos"
in there,
and it worked, you know, because, you know, Paul McCartney shows up. Yeah. And mucks in like one of the guys, and everybody has a cup of coffee.
Wasn't it? It was the iconic moment with Brian May on the roof.
Yeah.
S Club 7 and Cliff Richard, if memory serves me correctly.
It's Potty, yeah, it's mad.
McCartney, yeah, what a lineup.
It was great fun, you know, and everybody mucks in, and that's the only way they can work those sort of events.
Yeah. You touched on this earlier. I was chatting with Gas Glyn's band the other day, and they were talking about how they're so insistent that their gear is consistent from gig to gig, amps, backline, guitars. you tend to use the same guitars. You've got a kind of small port to use, but you mentioned that you're quite partial to having a challenge with an amp, something a little bit different. And talk us through that, because that goes against the grain of I would guess the majority of people in your profession, and I'm interested to see how you approach that.
I think going back to the Strat Pack thing, I was so impressed with Joe Walsh, because he showed up without rehearsal. Right, we knew which songs he wanted to do, so we rehearsed the tunes without him. And he showed up, and who was the guitar tech? Alan, I can't remember the second name. But he said to Alan, what you got for me to play through? And I need a guitar. And so he gave him a Strat and an old, I think it was a twin reverb or something. And he plugged it in and he played it, and it was Joe Walsh. It didn't matter. And that really impressed me. I thought, you know, it takes away all the nonsense that you have to have. Oh, you know, the right strings and the right pedals and the right amp. You know, I think the true talent of a player is here. Yeah. You know, it's right there. And if you can show that, you don't need anything else. If it's there naturally, then it'll be there whatever you play through.
Phil, I'm conscious of time, so I don't want to keep you all day. In terms of people that are looking at the session musician career path, I'm very, very conscious that what the job looks like today is very, very different to what it looked like back in the day. The references. What are the guiding principles and the bits of advice that you give to people that are looking to carve out a career as a session musician, be that in the studio, be that live? What are the kind of bits that you say to them?
Now, it's different. One of the things I say to my kids, you know, at my little clinics and things is, play me four versions of C major on a guitar without thinking about it. I think it's more important that you know the fundamental things about playing the guitar to do a session. Because the mechanics of the instrument, you'll have to explore them. And you don't know where you're going to be asked to, what style you're going to be playing, what type of thing you're going to be asked to play. So you need to know the fundamentals of the instrument. You need to know that if you find yourself up there, you can find a note that's going to be suitable for what's going on around you. And you've got to listen. You've got to listen to the other musicians. You've got to be sensitive to what other people are doing, and you've got to leave space in between the notes.
Brilliant.
That's about it, really. I wouldn't like to be doing sessions today. I don't even know if there are any.
It's a cutthroat, isn't it? It really, really is. It's
back when I started in the 70s, it was, you know, all you needed was a chum, really, to get you sessions. And I used to have a guy called Dave Marquis, who was a bass player, and he took me under his wing, and he used to get me sessions, and I'd find myself doing the weird and wonderful things, and all those recommendations came from Dave Marquis. I was lucky, I think, having the Kinks situation where, you know, to launch me, if you like.
Network is a huge part of it, isn't it?
Massive. Yeah.
It's about investing time into your network and I suppose conducting yourself the right way. And
you've got to be reliable. You've got to be on time. You've got to be able. You know, that's the key. You've got to be able to say, if someone says, "Can you play a arpeggio?" You know, you've got to be clean. you've got to be clean. You've got to be able. That's the key to it all, really. When someone says you want to do a rockabilly thing, you've got to be able to do it. You've got to be whatever it be. I sit at home and I noodle like this for hours on end, and I play a little game with the TV. I have the TV on in the background. If a piece of music comes on, I will figure out what key it's in, and I'll find a scale that I can play with it. I do that game a lot, and it's very useful because when you walk into a session, you never know what's going to happen. You never know what you're going to be confronted with. You know, very, very rarely you get the possibility to prepare yourself for a session. But in fact, it's better for me if I don't prepare for a session, because then you're fresh and you've got no preconceptions, and you can just give, and that's what people want.
So listen, thank you so much for taking the time to chat, mate. It's really, really good to see you. I really do appreciate it.
All right, Ben.
See you very, very soon.
I'm so, mate. Thanks very much.
Thanks, mate. See you soon.
Take care.